see that? Perfect. Okay. Let me just make sure. And did it transition to the next slide for you? Okay. I had
Yeah.
problems with that in the past. Okay. All right. So, guys, just real quickly introduction. So, my name is Michael. My last name is Matisak. I'm with Midwestern. I've been there just a little over 10 years now. So, I'm one of the senior counselors there. My primary program is PA. So, I do pretty much all of their stuff for them in terms of from the admission standpoint. So I run all of our interview days. We just had one on Monday. We're getting close towards the, like concluding all of our interviews for this cycle. But I'm generally the one that corresponds with any applicants and feedback and all that stuff. So what I really want to do is to just kind of get some insight into what our program is about. What it looks like to be a student there. What it takes to get into our program competitive wise and things like that. And obviously, if you have any questions towards the end, you can feel free to ask me anything and I'll do my best to answer any questions. So I just start off with this real quickly, just so you guys know if you don't know. Midwestern, we're founded out of Downers Grove, Illinois, which is basically Chicago. Only reason I point this out is because each campus, even though we are one Midwestern, we operate independently. So both campuses have a PA program and they're pretty much equivalent. I tell someone like if you get into either PA program for us, it's going to be the same, knowledge that you're gaining. It's more so just a geographical preference at that time. But being that PA is so extremely competitive, some people want to apply to both because there is no guarantee that if you get into us, that you're going to get in there. They may love you, we may hate you, vice versa. So, but obviously, logistically, it makes no sense if you have no desire to move to Chicago. I don't blame you. That's okay. Just apply to us. But sometimes people do ask, they think that, if they apply to one school, both schools are seeing them. They do not. It's only the school that you apply to. And then obviously we're a big what we call One Health initiative at Midwestern. We are just a graduate medical school. That's one of the things I love about us is that everyone there, I jokingly say, is smart. At that point, people are now into their more professional teaching. So it's all graduate, master's, doctorate level students, but it's all healthcare initiative. And so we, a lot of programs integrate together, learn a lot of concepts that help each other learn, through those concepts. So the One Health is something that we're big on. And then, the bottom thing, home state. So being that we are a private school, we don't contract seats, meaning that we don't put a preference on students who are in state or you went to the U of A or you went to the ASU or Grand Canyon or whatever. We look at it just from, 1,000-foot view. Basically, we get applications, we're going to look at them. Whoever's the most qualified, we're going to invite them to interview. And, the most, deserving applicants are going to be accepted into the program. So a little just snippet about our program. We are a little bigger in terms of PA programs. We have, our class size is generally around 90 students. One of the things I really attribute that to is the fact that we are just a graduate school. So, a lot of times when you have PA programs that are attached to like a state school, like, U of A or ASU or something like that, you know, overwhelmingly the faculty are not just teaching those master students, right? A lot of times they're going to have students that are teaching in undergrad, they're teaching other courses, they don't get to pick and choose. And so there's a lot on their plate where they can't really have, a 90 class student thing because they have other things going on. So for us, all of our faculty are 100%, you know, focused on you. We have a really good student to faculty ratio. It's 8-1. So there is still a lot of personalization to the program, even though it is a bigger class size. It is a 24-month program. A lot of them out there are. So, your primary one first year is going to be your didactic, your labs, your lectures, stuff like that. And then year two is really going to be primarily all of your rotations. We only have one start date a year. That's generally the first Monday of June is when we'll start our program. And then you do a little coursework with some other programs coming in. We do kind of staggered start since we have so many programs at Midwestern that are healthcare related. We can't have everybody start at the same time. So generally in June is when like our PA students, our nurse anesthesia students, physical therapy, some of them they'll come to campus. So some of those programs you might have some basic science courses with in the very beginning, but then as you kind of move into just your core PA curriculum, then you'll just become just your class of 90, and that's the only people you're really taking classes with. And then quarter-based systems, we are quarter-based. Well, I think U of A is a semester-based school, but 4 quarters. So you have a summer quarter, fall quarter, winter quarter, and a spring quarter. Quarters are generally 10 weeks apiece, then with a small break in between each quarter. Open door environment, that's a big thing for us. So we don't allow our faculty to post offers hours. So it's not something where you're like, oh, come see me between like 3 and 4 on a Thursday. Like that's just not fair. So we do expect our faculty to have their, as long as they're not teaching a class or obviously in a meeting and they're in their office, their door is open to their office. So students can come in at any time they want to, ask questions of the faculty. And there's generally multiple faculty that teach different subject matter. So if one faculty member is not there, there's somebody else who can kind of step in their place and answer questions for you. Obviously, a lot of hands-on learning that students get to incorporate, into what we're doing in terms of just, our anatomy labs are extremely popular. That's something that draws a lot of people to us. We have some of the most advanced cadaver-based anatomy labs in the country for any medical school. So we generally have about 60 human cadavers on campus at any time. So part of your training for us is a full human dissection. So you are going to be assigned a cadaver with generally about 3 other students, with 4-to-1 kind of student to cadaver ratio. Do a full human cadaver dissection, which is pretty rare now. A lot of programs are, moving to a synthetic based or virtual anatomy, where for us it's very important that we still want to be able to present that to us. So we have our own body donation program at Midwestern. We started that about 8 years ago. So pretty much almost all the cadavers we have on campus now are people who have signed up on our website to volunteer their bodies to us for science. So it's a fantastic program. And you can see, like, in terms of our pants pass rate, it's pretty phenomenal. We're generally over the last 5 years at a 98% pass rate, which is definitely above the average in the country. Last year was 100%. Our graduation rate has been 100% for like 8 years in a row. So we're very strong in terms of our teachings there. And then the community service, that's home. So that's open to a lot of the different programs we have on campus. Home stands for health outreach through medical education. So we go out and we provide free services in the community, underserved communities, things like that. So students can sign up for that if they want to. They don't have to, but it is a popular program at the university. All right. So basic requirements. And we'll go through basic requirements and then what is actually going to get you an interview. So basic requirement is a 3.0 GPA, both science and overall, right? Now, a couple things just to remember about when you're looking at GPAs is all GPAs are calculated by CASPA. And you're probably all familiar with CASPA. If you're not, CASPA is the Central Application Service for Physician Assistants. The main differentiating factor between CASPA calculations and a lot of your schools nowadays, and assuming U of A does it, I know ASU does in a lot of schools, but CASPA does not recognize grade replacement. So if you go to an institution and let's say you fail a class and you retake that class and you get an A, a lot of schools now will completely eliminate that failure or that horror grade from their GPA calculation on your transcripts, right? So it gives you, I think, a false hope of what your GPA truly is, because when you go to apply through CASPA, every grade you've ever gotten will come back to life on their calculation. And so this does throw people off quite often because, understandably so, if you do poor in a class, you need to retake that, you want to retake that, but your GPA could definitely look different than what your school is presenting to you if your school does grade replacement. And so that's the main thing I just like to hammer home with people, because I think, like, again, I don't understand why schools do it, because at the end of the day, employers are not going to ask what your GPA was. Employers just want to know if you have a bachelor's degree or this or that, right? The only people who care about GPAs when you go to a higher level of education, and those are all going to be, done through some application service. So CASPA is not the only one that does that. Pretty much every higher level of education in terms of dental school, pharmacy school, med school, all of them use application services like CASPA, and none of them recognize grade replacement. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I just like to hammer that home with people, just because I do think it sometimes people don't recognize that, and the GPA they're seeing on their transcript from their school is not the same as what we're going to be seeing. Now, if you've never retaken courses, don't worry about it. You're completely fine. But if you've retaken some courses in your life and your school did that in terms of replacing those grades, I always think it's a good idea to do your own GPA calculation, adding in those grades, just so you have a more accurate idea of what we're going to be looking at, because it can get pretty strict in terms of the requirements and what we're looking for. So moving on. So we don't have any entrance exams. we used to require the GRE up until a couple of years ago. We had the Casper too, but neither one of those really was a firm indicator of success in the PA program. Plus, a lot of schools had were starting to get rid of the GRE. So you don't want to be that school that's making people go take a stupid test for like 4 hours, spend a bunch of money, because then that's just naturally going to exclude you. People are like, nope, I'm not, I don't want to go do that. So I won't apply there. I'm going to apply. Literally, when we dropped the GRE, our applications doubled. We went from 1,200 to this year, we have over 2,500 applications. So that's great for us. But then also, I feel like it pushes the metrics up in terms of what you have to be in order to be a strong applicant and somebody who's going to get an opportunity to interview. So I see the pros and cons to it. It's nice that you don't have to go take the GRE, but I also felt like in the past where maybe if you had a little lower GPA, maybe you had a 3.4 or a 3.3, which is not a terrible GPA by any means, but this is PA school. Um, if you had a really strong GRE score, you could still get an opportunity to interview. Now, honestly, 3.4, don't expect to interview at this time. This year, really, if you weren't at least a 3.55, you weren't getting much of consideration. So just because of the sheer number of people who had at least a 3.55. The other thing would be like your healthcare experience. So paid patient care experience. So for us, we really look at the paid aspect. A lot of PA schools do, but you're going to have your healthcare hours, which healthcare can be pretty much anything in the healthcare field. But you can include like volunteer work and observation. A lot of that stuff can be included in your healthcare experience. It can't be included in your paid patient care, obviously, unless you have a paying job where you're doing one of those roles. So for us, we accept a lot of different roles. Scribing is the one that we actually like a lot, where some other programs I know nationwide won't accept scribing, but we have a lot of people who apply as scribes. We think they're great. You'll get EMTs and nursing assistants and tech positions, a lot of different techs, and really anything where you're in the role where you're working with somebody, you're taking care of them or providing them some type of services, home health care. Really, the main thing wouldn't be like you wouldn't want to do like back office work. That wouldn't really obviously be a patient care experience if you're in the back office and just taking phone calls or something like that. They want something where you're hands on, and I always tell people like the higher level of acuity you have in your position, I think is going to be the stronger position. But we take a lot of different roles. I mean, scribing, you don't do really any hands-on experience, but just in terms of the amount of observations you have, learning the terminology and all these different things, that they feel like that it brings people to the table that are really strong in those communication fields. So, and then having no paid patient care experience will get you absolutely nowhere in the experience in the application. So, I would say you want to have at least 500 hours. If you want to get your application even kind of looked at, you need to have 500 hours. 1,000 hours will put you into a better range. 2,000 hours and above will put you in a very strong range. So keep those numbers kind of in mind as we go through this. Now, prerequisites, these are going to be pretty consistent, probably with a lot of programs, and you're going to have a little discrepancies depending on the program. So that's why it's just important. Keep that in mind when you get ready, because most people are not applying to one school, they're applying to 5 or 10. So just make sure you look at those different requirements, because this is nothing that's going to be waived. If you get to the end of the process and you're like, you know what, I actually never got around taking OChem, then you will not start the program. They will make you wait a year and come back and retake OChem. So generally, like I said, this should be pretty uniform for a lot of programs in terms of just the requirements, anatomy and Gen Chem and OChem and stuff like that, math, English. And a lot of these are stuff that probably you've already taken, you don't have to worry about. You'll see like the recommended biochemistry is a really good one to take if you haven't taken it, just because you'll take it as part of our curriculum. So just having that foundational knowledge is great. Obviously, you have to have at least a C or higher in that course for it to count towards the prereq. They won't take any online labs right now. So if you've taken any of these courses and they were online, you're going to want to make sure that you retake that course. Otherwise, you should be good to go. Unless it was like obviously during the pandemic, everything went completely online. So if you had no choice but to take a course online, we will 100% take it. So here's just a kind of an overview of what our class looked like that came in this past June. So overall GPA, 381. Science GPA 377. So pretty strong in both those ones. Like I said, 2400. We're on track to be over, or I know we are over 2500 this year. And we did 377. That'll be roughly how many interviews we do this year. We already talked about the how what our class size is. Obviously, it's a female dominated. Pretty much every like medical profession that we offer is female dominated now. I don't think there's one, even the doctoral, like the DO program we have for a long time, that was always, and I think this year the women overtook that too. So you guys are just really good in healthcare. And then at Arizona residents, as you can see, 37%. So it's always that's actually a little bit stronger than what most of our demographics are. Generally, Midwestern as a whole is about 25% in state to 75% out of state. When you look at the people who are coming to our program, and then median age is around 25. So this is just a little snapshot. This is actually what the schedule looks like for our students that come in first year. So this can change from year to year, but I like to show this just so you kind of see the rigors of that. Um, it's a full-time schedule, right? There's no getting around it. Now, when you see the exams, don't freak out. We don't examine you twice a day, 4 days a week. That would be torture. But they do block that time out so that obviously if they have exams, then it'll be okay. You know, reality of the situation is you're probably going to have an exam almost every week. Sometimes multiple exams. It just depends. Midwestern in general tends to do more exams than a lot of programs on a more frequency, but with lower stakes. Like some programs are like, okay, you have this exam, you have a midterm, and you have a final, right? So if you screw up on one of those, it kind of tanks you. So here you're going to have more exams, but if you mess up on one, it doesn't have the implications that it might have if it was a midterm, right? A lot of times your midterms are the same weight as some of your exams just during the middle of the quarter. So once people kind of get used to the frequency, I don't think that they mind it nearly as much because they don't have the anxiety they have with like, okay, my midterm's coming up, and if I mess this up, it could tank me out of the program. So, but you can see it's pretty much 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. The Fridays, like I said, it's not an open day. You're going to have stuff that's going on. Patient exercises, so your OSCEs, simulations, things like that. They'll have a bunch of stuff going on. So, this isn't something where you're going to have a job, and you guys probably already know that. Like, this is your full-time job because this is just the time you're spending in class, and then you're going home and studying. I don't know of a PA student that we have that's ever had a job. So, but you never know. There are some people that are above and beyond, but that's kind of how that's going to happen. So rotations. When you get to your rotations, like I said, that's going to be your second year. There's different ones. So, people have asked, what types of ambulatory clinics host students. So we have 7 core rotations, and each rotation is 6 weeks in length. Rotations are getting harder and harder for schools to fill or to find, I should say. Some schools are actually reducing their rotation length down to like 3 weeks because there's just not enough preceptors out there. PA is a hot field, and there's more schools that are opening up, but there's not enough providers to be able to assimilate all these students in and do the training they need. But we've done really well so far. So yours will be 6 weeks in length. Everybody's required to do primary care, women's health, family medicine, internal medicine, psychiatry, and surgery. Then you get one elective rotation that you can pick from. And you can kind of see like some of those are there's a lot of them. These are just inpatient, outpatient, endocrinology, cardiology, ICU. A lot of different surgical subspecialties. So we'll get into that further on. Like once you're here, you would meet with our clinical coordinator and kind of figure out what elective rotation you want to do. The inpatient rotations, there's some, both core rotations and electives. So you may also have inpatient experiences in women's health rotations, and their surgery rotation, and then Mayo Clinic also offers an inpatient internal medicine rotation that students can apply for. It is a competitive one because people really like to do it, but if you get in for it, it's a great experience. And then, students often like, can I request certain rotations and stuff like that? Not really. Okay. You're assigned your rotation. Again, like I told you, this is super competitive, in terms of just being able to get rotations. Schools really struggle to find those now. So we can't just have people pick and choose and decide where they want to go. So, we're going to assign you to your rotations. Obviously, you can discuss that with our clinical coordinator. and see if something maybe aligns a little bit better for you. But there's no guarantee. A lot of times it's like, here's what you're doing, go do it. And then, like I said, it's all based on your preceptor availability, subject to affiliation agreements, conditional environments, all that stuff has to be in place. And then, in terms of the rotations, a lot of them, tend to be in the Metro Phoenix area. We have a lot of partnerships with the hospitals and clinics and stuff in the area. Some of the cities obviously outside of Phoenix, rural areas, in and out of state. But there can be times when you have to leave state. So we tell people that, there are rotations in California, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, stuff like that. So if that's the case, you've got to figure out how to get yourself there and where you're going to stay. Now, if that's something that we commonly use, sometimes we do have subsidized like housing agreements or someplace that students are able to go stay at, things like that. But sometimes it's just finding your own accommodation, Airbnb, something like that while you're there during that time frame. So, all right. So applying, um, CASPA generally opens up mid-April around time frame, and you're always going to want to apply, a year ahead of time. You guys probably know this stuff. And then, so all of our people that are interviewing right now are interviewing to start in June of next year. So obviously applying as early as you can. I always encourage that just because it's such a competitive thing. And I do a lot of times feel like it's first come, first serve. In terms of getting, there's only so many application uh, or so many interview spots that we have to offer to students. And if you're somebody who's applying super late in the process, all those interview days may already be filled. So I generally tell people like I really would try to have my application in by July at the latest, even though it stays open until October. I mean, you have 2,500 people that are applying, so it is very, very competitive. Um, and then we start interviewing in July. So our interviews start in July, and then like this year, our last interview date will be in January. Right now, all of our interviews are virtual. I keep pushing to get interviews in person, at least a hybrid. Our PA program is the only program that hasn't actually reverted back to doing some in-person interviews. Like our dental program only does in person. Like they're like, if you don't come, then go somewhere else. But a lot of the programs we have offer virtual dates as well as in-person dates because I do think our campus is a huge selling point for our program. So I keep trying to hammer that home with them, but they haven't loosened up yet to that idea. So right now, everything is a virtual interview. Um, so the interview, so when you apply, it's kind of a tiered process. So you send your application through CASPA. Once that gets processed and everything, then it will get sent to us. So we review it. We're kind of the first line of defense. So, like a counselor like myself, I would look over it. If I think you've got a good application, you kind of meet the things that we're looking for, then we'd invite you to interview, or I would invite you to interview. But I'm not the end all be all. It goes from me then to PA faculty, kind of our committee, and they would look at it, and if they agree, then they'll say, yeah, let's interview them. So you would get an email invite from us. You would go onto your student scheduler, and then you would see the dates that are currently open for interview, and then schedule yourself in for an interview. So the way the interviews are conducted at our university for PA is it's a panel interview. So meaning that you're going to interview with two other students at the same time with two faculty members. And the interviews generally last about 50 minutes in length. So it's a conversational type interview. They're blind interviews, meaning that we don't provide the faculty any of your academic background. Everything that we're going to give to them is solely based on like your um, healthcare experience, if you have extracurriculars, personal statement, those type of things they can look at and derive questions from. But, a lot of it is just them kind of get to know you, but really kind of seeing how you work with other individuals in the room. None of the other PA is the only program on our campus that does a group style interview like that. All of our other programs do individual interviews where you interview by yourself with two or three faculty members for half an hour, right? They want to see how do you work with other people. Are you somebody who brings your own unique ideas to the table? Are you somebody who is considerate of others? When they ask a group question, do you just hog up all the time? Do you let other people talk? Are you considerate of other people? There's a lot of things that they're looking for. And, I tell people like these are all faculty members. So they're people that are looking at it through the lens of, is this a teachable student? Is this somebody who is going to be engaging, somebody who's going to be a good collaborator, somebody who's going to be a pleasure to have in the classroom? Really, I jokingly say this, but like it's our chance to go on a date with you before we get married. And same thing for you. Like talk to people and kind of figure out like, hey, do I like the way this, how, do they seem like nice people? Can I see myself being taught by them and vice versa? Because otherwise it's just looking at a piece of paper, and you can tell a good amount of stuff from the paper, but it's really communication, and just hearing your own thoughts and ideas about the PA profession, because that's a big thing too. It, Overwhelmingly, from my experience, the people that get rejected from interview lack PA knowledge. That's generally why they don't accept them, is that they say this person needs to spend more time with PAs and a better understanding of what the PA field is. So, because PA is hot, everybody wants to be a PA. There's so many more things that PAs can do now with less restrictions, and so it is something that draws a lot of people to it. But they sometimes don't spend enough time actually understanding the field itself and some of the restrictions and capabilities and stuff. And when they get presented those questions, they freeze up a little bit. And so that's just something to keep in mind. So, but then, once the interview is done, we always do like a student panel too. So I always have at least three current students that'll be on in this panel for about an hour with a faculty member, and it's just a Q&A session. So that way people can ask questions of them, what's their experiences like, why did they come to Midwestern, whatever questions you might have for them as an interviewee. And then, once that's done, really the interview day's done. So just try to give you that little bit of insight in regards to what our school is like and the different things that be available to you. Um, so interview day's done. Once the interview day is done, normally within a week or so, we would review all the people that interviewed for that day. And then the committee sits down and then they make decisions in regards to, who are we going to accept. So, oops, let me go back just real quick. So a lot of this kind of I already went over, but we got your application. If you're below a 3.0, you're going to be denied. So that's why I kind of tell you that to keep that in mind. But I also want you to kind of keep in mind like what is going to be competitive, because if you're applying with an application of 3.1, you're kind of lighting your money on fire because you're paying money to apply, right, to all these schools. So you need to look at it through the lens of, oh, do I meet the qualifications to apply, or am I actually a competitive applicant? Because if you're a 3.1 student, you are not competitive, not for our program. If you're a 3.3 student or a 3.4 student, you're not competitive. So I try to be as forthright. Now that changes every year. So I'm not, saying all the time that's like that. But historically, like 3.1 and 3.2 has never been competitive for our program. Like I said, when we had the GRE, I saw some 3.4s that would get in. But this year, I don't think you're going to see, I know we're not really going to see anybody below a 3.55. And that's just due to the sheer number of people that want to be part of the PA field and part of our program. So just do your homework, because, like I said, if you apply with a 3.1, you'll get waitlisted pretty quickly. And, it's costing you $100 and some to apply to every single school you're applying to. So kind of figure out where you're at and if you're actually a competitive applicant. And we'll go through all that stuff, but kind of, prior to the interview, those decisions, I'm hoping all of you would get an invite for an interview, but there is a wait list, and that's generally the people that meet that 3.0 threshold, but they're not quite to the point where they're actually a competitive enough to get an interview. And then you have the deny, and overwhelmingly the people who are denied are below a 3.0. They don't know they're a 3.0, or they just didn't pay attention that that's the threshold, and they apply and they automatically get an email saying, thanks for applying. Unfortunately, you don't meet the minimum standards of our program. So another thing just to keep in mind. And then, like I said, once we interview you, we've gone through all that, the committee sits down, then they do a full review of your application. Because like I said, initially, the people that are interviewing you have never seen your grades. But when they sit down as a committee, they're able to access those then. And then because your interview grades are its own little separate section. So, if you bomb your interview, you're not getting in. But even if you do really good on your interview, you're not necessarily getting in. It's all different parts, because they sit down. Now they're like, okay, well, let's also look at their grades. Let's look at letters of recommendation, those type of things. And if all those three things align, then yeah, you have a great chance of getting in. Normally, if you crush your interview, you have a really good chance of getting into the program. But I have seen people that crushed their interview and they were still an alternate. I mean, you're not going to get denied if you have a good interview, you're never going to be denied. But being that it's so competitive and depending on where they are in the process, they may not have enough seats left, so they might make somebody an alternate where they could pull them in a little bit later down the road. So just something to keep in mind. So do's and don'ts. You know, I always say include non-healthcare activities, both paid, unpaid. I really, people will ask me like, should I include this? I'm like, include as much stuff as you possibly can. Outside of like, oh, I did this when I was in, grade school. Like, yeah, don't include that. But anything else, because really at the end of the day, the worst thing that'll happen is that they just disregard it, right? But if you leave something out that might have been beneficial, then that's no good, right? So put it in there. And like I said, worst thing that, let's say you did put some stuff in there when you were in middle school, like they're not going to count it, but it's not like they're like, well, we're not going to interview this person. Why'd they do that? That's dumb. Like, no, they're just like, okay, well, that's kind of outside the scope of what we're looking for right now. But, you know, put it in there. In certificates, anything that you've done that shows work ethic, anything where you went above and beyond to get certificated or, something that shows achievement, those are great. Put it in there. Um, Building a strong relationship with future recommenders. That's so my feeling on letters of recommendation, and I've said this for a while, it's the same thing with personal statements. If I could get rid of both of them tomorrow, I would. I don't think they serve much of a purpose, to be completely honest with you. Letters of recommendation will do way more harm than they will ever do good. And that's my estimation. And I think it's fact, really, because the thing with your letters of recommendation is we expect those to be really good. You know, these are people that you're supposed to be building a relationship with that are writing you a letter that says you're awesome, right? I mean, that's what a letter of recommendation is. You're going to someone and saying, "Hey, will you write me a letter that says I'm awesome?" Because basically what you're implying, right? When you ask me to write you a letter. So when we get that, it's not like, "Wow, we didn't see that coming." They said they're really awesome. Like, no, it's kind of expected. You're checking off the boxes, but it's the one that say you're not awesome, and we get those quite often too. We'll get ones that'll say, I don't really know this person that well. This person's going to need additional support to be successful in a PA program. I was forced to write this letter by my supervisor. Like, I'm not even kidding you. I've gotten all these things are examples, and those are the ones that will tank you because then it's like, okay, that's the best you could do. This is the person you found to write you a letter that thinks you're terrible. So building a strong relationship with people, that's the important thing because that's really what letter recommendation is. Are you somebody who's able to establish a strong relationship with somebody, in the healthcare community or your faculty or something like that? So just keep that in the back of your mind. Is just having some people that you feel confident aren't going to subvert your PA career by writing you a letter that's not very good. Checking with admissions. That's just something you're, like I said, I'm giving you information right now. Things can change. Like we went over the prereqs. There may be a prereq that now we require biochemistry. Even though right now it's just recommended, it may become a requirement. Or maybe, we start making people take a test or something like that. So every year you just want to keep up to date in terms of what the requirements are for each program, obviously, that you're applying to. Um, and then obviously don't rushing to apply, just take your time on your application. Make sure, what I say is just make sure you're submitting the best application you can submit at that time. Um, Overestimating your competitiveness for a program. This is funny because I actually had this conversation with a guy a couple days ago where he called in. This is his second year being waitlisted by us. And he told me straight up, he's like, man, my first year, he's like, I knew I was going to get an interview. I had no doubt. He's like, I'm going to get this. And he didn't come close to interviewing. And this year he didn't. He's like, I even did better this year and I didn't get one either. Because he's like, I just thought I was way better than I actually was. And that's why I said, like, because it's hard for me to be like, oh, 3.4, three. I mean, that's not a bad GPA. If you're a 3.5 student, you're a good student, but you're not competitive for what PA is right now, depending on the program you're looking at. So that's the thing where you have to understand, like, where am I applying? What do they expect from me? Because, for us, our healthcare experience isn't that bad. Some schools want 4,000 hours. And if you don't have 4,000 hours of paid patient care experience, they're not even going to look at you, right? So you've got to understand who you're applying to, what their expectations are, and if you're actually a competitive applicant, right? Acting unprofessionally, most people don't do that, so I'm not really too worried about it. But our school is kind of a smaller school, so everybody knows everybody. So you just want to be professional in every interaction you have with whoever you're talking to at the school. Um, and then trying to overimpress, like, be yourself, regardless. Like I said, they don't have access to your grades, but they're going to see them at some point. So you don't have to throw out, the fact you're a 4.0 student or something like that. And I always say if they're diving into things like that, feel free to elaborate. But most of the time, just be yourself. That's what they're really looking for. Um, So a little bit about us. If you don't know about the campus, so we do our whole campus. So being that we're private school, we're a gated campus. So we're a secure campus. So there's a fence around our whole campus. You have to go through security just to get onto our campus. And then once you're on campus, everything is badge access. So all of our students have their own personal badges, which gets them into every single building on campus. So you need that badge. That's what opens up the doors to the buildings, to your labs, all that good stuff. But what's also nice though is then that offers a lot more freedom on campus. So generally stuff is open from like 7 a.m. to midnight. So if you want to go in the cadaver lab at 11 o'clock at night, you can because we can track you. We know who you are. And we trust our students that are on campus. Um, we do have on-campus student housing. We're actually building a bunch. So we have 550 units right now. They're all apartments. They're not dorms. So people just lease those through Midwestern. We're building another 250 right now across the street. So they're nice apartments. Most of the people really. That's why we're building more because for years we've had a year-long wait list for people to get into those because once they see them, they're like, man, this is nice. It's right on campus. I can walk there. They're family friendly. We have a lot of people that are married and have kids that are in our programs. So they can live in there while they're going through the program. Parking's all free on campus, which is really nice too. So students obviously love that because that doesn't really exist many places anymore. So something to just keep in mind in terms of the student housing, but there is a bunch of apartments around Midwestern. So, some people don't want to be able to see their classroom from their window. Totally get it. So they may want to live a couple blocks away or a couple miles away, whatever it might be. There's a lot of apartments around us. And then a lot of clubs. We have, tons of clubs on campus, organizations, stuff that are academic based, some that are just fun based, depending on what you want to do. A lot of intramural sports. We obviously don't have collegiate sports teams like U of A, but we have a lot of people that come from collegiate sports teams that still want to do stuff. And so we have like indoor, outdoor basketball, volleyball, soccer, flag football, pickleball, a bunch of different things that people get involved in. Student government, volunteering opportunities, like we talked about home and things like that. So there is a lot of stuff that you can also be involved in if you want to. So um, this little code, if you guys want to scan this, and then it'll kind of bring up what this meeting is, you just have to fill in your information, and then you would actually get stuff fed to you from our PA program in regards to like future events, things that are happening. So it's something if you're interested in, you can scan that code and just fill in your information. It'll ask you the program of interest, which obviously is PA, and then you would get emails from our PA program and things like that are going on. So I think this is my information. So if you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to me. Like I said, if you call the university and you have a question on PA, they're gonna send it to me anyway. But that's my direct line in my office. So you can just call me directly. I'd say email's probably the best way, to be honest with you, because I don't always answer my phone. I got a lot of stuff going on, but emails I always get back to. So I would direct your attention or towards that if you do need to reach out to me. So that being said, I think I've got most of my stuff out. So I'll open the door up to like any questions you guys might have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. And if you guys have questions, please let me know. Let me pull this up. Okay. So PA school gets harder and harder. What would you say are distinguishing factors between an average applicant who gets rejected and an applicant who gets accepted? What's making applicant? So, I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's patient care experience and it's your GPA, like hands down, That's why I'm so like I said, like personal statements and letters of recommendation, those aren't distinguishing things that's going to get a person into a program. I mean, I got just the other day an applicant who's had a letter of recommendation from the attorney general from the state of Arkansas and one of their congressmen wrote letters of recommendation and they're not interviewing with us because their grades suck. I mean, you've got to hit all these points, like This is about like your preparedness to come in and be ready to, handle the rigors of what that this program is going to be. And I think a lot of programs are looking at that just in terms of like, can you do this? Have you shown a passion for healthcare, which is coming to your patient care experience? Um, but those are the things that distinguish people. I'm not going to shy away from that, because I want to be forthright and honest with you. Like if you've got a 3.9 GPA and 3,000 hours of patient care experience, you're interviewing. You know, if you have a 3.2, you're not. Like that's just how things are right now. I mean, there's too many people that are wanting to get into programs, and it's a meritocracy. It's who has the best grades, who deserves it, and that's not me and deserve it from whatever it might be, but based on your academic performance and based on the amount of time you put into healthcare experience, those are the things right now that distinguish who's getting an interview and who's not, right? That's why I said like I thought it kind of sucked when we got rid of the GRE because I know nobody wants to go take it, but it also was something that could buoy people up. That maybe if you were somebody in that 3.4, 3.5 range, which again is not a bad GPA, you could get attention because like, oh man, like this GRE is on fire. Like this person's really, really, really good. But now they won't even look at it. Even if you take the GRE, they won't look at it. So I tell people, no, don't even do it. Don't do it on our account, and don't send it to us because they won't look at it because they don't want any perceived biases. That's the other thing. They'll be like, well, this person got in because they also sent GRE scores. Well, that's not fair. So at the end of the day, um, it's those are the two things that are going to get you to an interview, right? My job is to get you to an interview. What you do at the interview is up to you, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of people who are really brilliant and stuff like that, and they interview and they're terrible. And then and there's people that are maybe a little bit lower on the spectrum in terms of what we're looking for, what they consider to be a competitive applicant, who crush their interview and they get in. A lot of 4.0 people don't interview that well. And then you got some people that are a little bit lower, and again, lower 3.55, but really good conversationalness, really good understanding of the PA profession, and they get in. So it's that mixture of things, that mixture of good academics, good patient care experience, and then obviously ability to conversate well and articulate yourself well. Because that's the other thing we'll get people that if you guys have never interviewed professionally, it's always good to do some good mock interviews. Have people ask you questions just off the wall. I mean, you're always going to get questions in regards to like why is it Midwestern? Why is this a school you feel like that you want to pursue your PA education at? So and don't be like, well, I live in Arizona. Like that's a terrible answer. So do some research in regards to the school and regardless of whatever schools you're applying to, um, just to have a much more thoughtful answer, in terms of like the facilities and the teaching. And I looked at some of the faculty and this blah, blah, blah. Like that's the stuff that perks the ears up because it shows that you put some time and effort into it. So let me go back up here. So preference of who letters, I always recommend PAs. They love PA letters, like the more PA letters, but again, they need to be good, right? Like I don't tell you just go find a PA and be like, hey, write me a letter, if you know multiple PAs that you have strong relationships with, that's who I'd go with all day long. Because the other ones, I mean, I've been enough in their committee meetings that they're like, hey, where's the PA one? So let's look at the PA ones because they don't care about your soccer coach or, even faculty letters. A lot of times they disregard, but the PA ones are the ones that I would say if you have those, I would really shoot for at least one from a PA. It's not required, there's no requirement for who it has to come from. But if you can get one from a PA, I think it looks really, really good. So AP credit, we do 100%. All we need is just to make sure that on your official transcripts, it shows what the AP credit was granted for. Because sometimes it's just a lump sum. It says 36 hours AP credit. And we're like, cool. Well, we don't know what that is. So we need to know if you're using it towards biology, it says 4 hours, 4 credit hours biology. So sometimes your registrar has to print something out that shows that for you and send it to us. But as long as we can kind of match those up, we'll take it for sure. Um, recommend that students do anything to prepare for PA school once accepted. I don't know if you really can prepare, to be honest with you. I mean, I think a lot of that's was what they're trying to That's what they're trying to evaluate. As much as I hammer home, like it's academics, that's the hardest transition, right? That's what people struggle with is just the workload. It's the course load. And that's where people have to really kind of recalibrate in terms of like being able to handle the rigors of what's being thrown at them and being able to digest that on a daily basis. So the best way to prepare is to take a heavy workload, not crazy heavy workload, but something that shows that because that's what they're looking at, can you handle the rigors of what we're going to throw at you? Like I haven't seen this much with PA, but like I saw this with dental last year where our dental program, we had a guy that applied, he had a 3.8 GPA, really strong. His DAT scores, that's the entrance exam for the dental school, were very, very good. He'd never taken more than three classes at a time in his life, and they wouldn't even think about interviewing him because it's like, well, cool, you did well taking three classes at a time, but you never proved you could handle five classes at a time, which is that's the standard, right? That's generally what you're taking. Um, if it's not five, it's four that are extremely heavy, right? So that's what they're looking for is are you prepared to come in here and handle this curriculum? And so that's the best way I think to prepare yourself is, and maybe you're already doing that. If you're pushing yourself, you're doing full-time classes all the time, and difficult classes, that's what's going to alleviate any fears they have, but also probably make you prepared to come in. So, but having a low minor GPA for spectral means if you're still high. So it's an evaluation of both things. So, and that to me sucks, to be honest with you, because if your overall GPA is below a 3.55, even if your STEM, let's say your science GPA is a 3.9, if your overall GPA is a 3.4, you'll be waitlisted. Like the standards for this cycle was you have to be above a 3.55, both overall GPA and science GPA. So again, it's fluid. It can change from year to year. But this year, I mean, obviously, unless I don't know what your Spanish, what your overall GPA is and how much the Spanish affected you. But that to me, like I always say, like that when I have to work with students and they've got a lower GPA, I'm like it sucks because like nobody cares. Your Spanish is not going to determine whether or not you're a good PA, right? Or if you sucked in history classes or whatever, like that shouldn't matter, but it does for them. So, you know, you're still going to need to have a decent, again, at this point, this cycle, a 3.55 overall GPA. But the science GPA is always going to trump it. I mean, that's going to be the most important one. I'd much rather you have a 3.55 overall, but you have a 3.9 science, then that's going to look much better. But you still have to hit those metrics, right? You still need to hit that 3.55 at this point again to get in there. So that's kind of what I was looking at. Um, so yeah, if you have a GPA that's a little bit lower, um, let's say I'm talking to you right now and your GPA is 3.3, something like that. Um, I, I mean, I never want to tell people don't apply, but I want to be transparent to people because you're most likely not going to get an interview. This cycle, 99.999% likelihood you were not going to interview, pretty much 100%, you know? So it's hard for me to tell you like, oh yeah, go for it. I mean, some people like to apply just to kind of go through the process. And yes, you're spending money on it, but at least you can then get some feedback because we will generally do that. We'll generally tell people like, okay, you didn't you didn't get an interview this cycle because your GPA didn't meet our standards, your healthcare experience was a little bit weak, whatever it might be. Um, but depending on what your GPA is lacking. So if you have if your science, again, let's go back and let's say your overall GPA is a 3.3, but your science GPA is a 3.8, right? You don't really need to prove yourself in the science realm anymore, but you do need to get that overall GPA up if you want to be. Now, I always think it's better to have an overall GPA that's lower because you can take whatever you want. Any class is going to elevate your overall GPA, where not any class is going to elevate your science GPA. If you have a low science GPA, you need to take science-based classes, right? That's what's going to bring that up. But if you're somebody who's sitting there and you're like, hey, my overall GPA, my Spanish affected me, well, now you can go and take racquetball. I mean, you can take just hopefully classes that will you'll be engaged in, stuff that, and that's why I tell people like find classes that you actually think would be enjoyable to take and go take those classes. Now could you go do a master's program again? Yes, but like there's no guarantee that's going to get you up to where you need to be either. And that's obviously a lot more difficult coursework. Um, and I don't think that's going to guarantee you like getting into a program, or at least even ours. Like I said, it just depends on, it is harder, when if you've gone through, and I don't know where you guys are sitting right now in terms of your academic career, but if you're close to graduating and you have a 3.3 GPA, your GPA is pretty saturated. You've taken a lot of coursework, and so it's going to take a lot more coursework to elevate your GPA, right? Where if you're a freshman or you're a sophomore, you've taken some classes, but you can elevate that, not want to say very quickly, but a lot quicker than somebody who's a senior by taking some additional courses. Obviously, just your natural course of going through school. If you're sitting at a 3.3 right now and you're telling me you're a junior, you can probably easily be at a 3.6 by the time you graduate if you just hunker down and get A's or A minuses. But you've got to look at it through that lens because B's aren't your friend. A B is a 3.0, right? A B plus is a 3.3. So you're still falling short, right? An A minus is a 3.7. So you really want to be in the A minus to A category as much as you possibly can because B's are pulling you down. And that's a crazy thing to say because a B is not a bad grade, right? But in the world of PA, it is because it's so hyper competitive that you've got to have really good GPAs. Now, again, I'm Midwestern. There's a lot of other schools out there that, you know, probably aren't going to be as strenuous or strict in terms of what their expectations are, but there's a lot that are, and a lot that are more so than us. So it's just something to keep your mind kind of when you're taking classes, understanding like where you need to be in terms of the classes you're taking and the grades you're getting if you really are trying to propel yourself up. So, um, answer four. Uh, so Aubrey, how would you suggest handling interview questions that you weren't expecting or don't have an immediate answer for? And it's a good question because I also know they don't like word salad, which is when people just talk around and they just keep talking, and you can tell they've told me that, and I'll see it in multiple notes where this person just went on and on. I mean, I would obviously you're gonna try to answer it the best as you can, but at some point, I think you just need to kind of accept defeat and let and move on. Let somebody else, because that's the other thing where if you just are going to dominate a conversation for 10 minutes of you just talking in circles and obviously not knowing what you're talking about, then that looks like, you're not generous to those in the room with you and their time and what they're trying to do. So I think that, that's why I always like to have people do test interview questions and just to have people come up with just random things. So hopefully you don't get caught off guard with that. I think most of the time people have at least something that they can present in terms of an answer. I don't think they're going to generally ask something that is overly like I don't want to say difficult, but I think a lot of times it's like scenario questions they'll ask, how would you approach it if you saw one of your classmates cheating on a test? You know, and then, they're not going to ask you like, okay, in the third district of Phoenix, their particular law, like it's nothing where they're going to get really into something that you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This sounds like completely crazy to me. But sometimes I think people just don't have real great answers and they just try to make their answer great by just continuing to talk and talk and talk. And so I think it's better just to kind of be like, this is how I would approach it. And like, okay, move on. You know, that's 100% what I would say you should do. Recommend taking a minor? Not necessarily. Like for us, no. We don't pay any attention to whether a person has a minor or not. So if you got one, cool. But if you're not taking one, I, my perspective, I don't think you need to go and say, to set up and take a minor because that's not really something that we focus in on at all. Uh, so recommend for patient care experience. So like I said, if you have access, like the higher level of acuity, the better. So more hands-on experience, the more you kind of have a person's life in your hands, you know, is always kind of preferred over, somebody who's like phlebotomy. Like we'll take phlebotomy, but that's pretty like they are not a huge fan of it. They want to see that they've done something else besides phlebotomy, because you're just really just doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? So, but like I think probably the best things, paramedics, EMTs, because that's a lot of like high stakes, a lot of different things you're doing as that role. But I don't, plus it's a certificated position. It's hard to get in there. It's a lot of stuff that you have to do. But you don't necessarily need to go do that by any means. Um, like I said, ER techs, those are good. We like those. Scribes, something where you're kind of just part of the action a lot. You kind of see a lot of different scenarios going on. It's not redundancy, like like going back to phlebotomy, or something where you're actually having some different occurrences that are taking place and doing different tasks throughout the day. Um, but it, it just depends on what's available to you, what you can go out there and what you can find. We get CNAs, we get people that are a lot of medical assistants, those type of things. Um, like I said, we will get people that are like pharmacy techs, we'll get PT techs. Um, so there are a lot of different roles that we'll accept. And it's just, it, I think it comes down to like what you can find and what you're able to do. But yeah, in a perfect world, if you're like, I can go do it, whatever you tell me to do, I would say, yeah, probably something like an EMT, something along those lines. But then also, there's a flip side to that because a lot of times the stuff that you're trained to do is as a paramedic or EMT, they have to untrain you. Like they want to teach you how to do it as a PA, and sometimes you're doing more of kind of a shotgun medicine because you're just out there kind of on the fly trying to keep people alive and do different things like that, where they have a little more kind of nuanced technique that they want to pull you back and train you how to do things maybe a little bit differently. But in terms of the experiences and the things you've seen, it's pretty fantastic. So, um, yeah, I think that's all the questions I see in the chat. Do you guys have any other questions?
Yeah, I think that's probably it. Well, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, yeah, it did exactly an hour. That worked out pretty well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was perfect.
no, if you guys have any questions, if any of you are thinking about applying, like I said, down the road or anything that comes up after the meeting, feel free to shoot me an email anytime. Like I said, I'm gonna help you as much as I possibly can, be as transparent as I possibly can. But yeah, I mean, it's a great field. I'm sure all of you are excited to do it. So just research the schools you're looking at. Like I said, if you have questions for me, feel free to reach out to me too. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much again.
Yeah.
Everyone have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.